So I'm Miriam. I'm the space reporter and science editor at Mashable, and we are going to be your panel of space nerds for the day. Hello. And I have two incredible panelists to my right here. If you guys wouldn't mind introducing yourself and sort of give us an idea of what you do.
Definitely. Thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you for moderating as well. I'm Kellie Gerardi. I've spent about 7 years in aerospace and defense, and I feel fortunate that I've had the opportunity to gain experience in so many different areas of this amazing industry. On the professional side, I've led industry studies and workshops for DARPA, business development for Masten Space Systems, a launch company, communications for the Commercial Spaceflight Federation, and then on the personal side, I've done basically everything that one can do without actually going to space to be an astronaut. So I'm working towards it, but I have done analog Mars missions, simulations for deep space flight, spending weeks in a hab with a crew of other people, wearing spacesuits when you go outside, eating rehydrated foods. I've trained as a scientist astronaut candidate with Project Possum, studying high-altitude noctilucent clouds. I started a space fashion company that was a giant money pit, but I learned a lot and I got a lot of cool clothes that only fit me, so that was great. And then I've donated my time to numerous organizations, particularly around women in STEM and engaging young folks in STEM. So that's me in a nutshell. It's a lot of different areas, but I'm wildly passionate and optimistic about the future because of this industry.
That was great, and before I even introduce myself, I have to say, just look at her shoes, and I know she's making a statement.
Okay, one quick note with these, like I thought I was doing so well, I saved up so much money to buy a pair of Gucci shoes because they had space on them, and then I realized I have no style, so now I just wear these every day as a statement because I have spent so much money on them.
So good afternoon. I'm Lika Guhathakurta, and what you're clearly seeing here, this is kind of fascinating. As we were chatting in the green room, we are not only two space nerds, but we also represent kind of two different generations almost. So I have been in the space business for 30 years, and I've been with NASA for 25 of those. What I have done is also pretty close to what she's saying. I didn't go to the fashion world, and I wish I could. Still want to go to space, and I think I'm of the right age, beyond childbearing, small, technically competent, that if there is a Mars mission, they ought to select me. So what have I done? I have worked with astronauts, launching payload, made instruments, did my own science and delegated science. I actually sort of led initiation of a program called Living with a Star, and it is probably one of the most beautiful names of a program that you know of, and that star is our sun. And so what that program really talks about and describes is looking at science with relevance. How does the sun interact with Earth? And this is beyond just being radiated by sunlight. Outside of our atmosphere, which kind of drives weather and climate, there is yet another layer, and it's called the ionosphere, magnetosphere, and that's where there is another kind of weather called space weather, and the sun kind of dictates and dominates that. Something that you might not know about, but something that's tremendously important for us, because when the sun produces storms, our technologically dependent system, like our power grid or our satellites, actually can go off and create tremendous hazards. And this field came to be known as heliophysics. And so I have created books, outreach material, and missions. So a lot of the solar stuff that you'll end up seeing on TV are probably missions that I have played a very key role on. And so at the end, I would like to say, as a child, I just looked at the stars and I was fascinated. This is at the age of 5 or 6. And from that point today, actually, I created my last mission, this is, called Parker Solar Probe. This mission is going to launch on 4th of August. And this is a mission that is actually going to touch the sun, not just looking at the sun. So it's going to go to within 10 solar radii of the sun. If you all have seen the total solar eclipse and saw the corona, that's where this mission is going to go. So, you can make the impossible possible. You just have to be tenacious and keep at it.
It's true. So I love that you bring up the fact that you two sort of represent these kind of two generations of spaceflight and space science. And I'm curious if you can talk about that a bit. So I know that you've found some common ground and some things that are very similar between the two of your experiences as people in the space industry. But what are some of those differences, and what have you seen change, Lika, especially over the last 30 years of your career?
Yeah, it's interesting. In my generation, so I came to USA in 1980, got married in 1983. I have 2 children. And what I saw during my generation, not many of the women scientists were having children. And today, while we were in the green room, just about everyone there had just either had a child or are pregnant. And that is such a change to see. This generation is actually moving on with, life, work balance, things we don't want to talk about, but not really questioning that, and it's quite accepted in society. And some of the rules have changed. There's more parental leave for that. In the world of science, of course, it is no longer a government enterprise. The commercial space sector has come in, and that is changing everything. So it's not just NASA launching spacecraft, right? Now we have the commercial sector who are actually talking about space tourism, about going back to the moon, going to Mars. These are really very big societal changes, I think.
Yeah, and I'll pick up exactly there. I graduated college the same year that the space shuttle program was retired. And so for me, entering that workforce, knowing that I wanted to touch human exploration, I was so discouraged. And I just didn't know what else was going on. So I felt very fortunate at that time to find the commercial spaceflight industry. And that's where I've built my career. It gave me the access, it gave me the impact that I was craving to have, some sort of handprint on this next giant leap. But what you said has a lot of bearing. I just had a baby, so I had a little girl 6 months ago. Her name is Delta Victoria, which Delta V is a very nerdy rocket equation for change in velocity. So I am all in. But it's been interesting, and this whole, it's still very much a boys' club, and this, you have to remember that it was only in the 80s until women were even allowed to be astronauts and even thought of as part of this human exploration push. And so for me, obviously things have changed tremendously, and there are many avenues for women to get involved in space and STEM and mentorship programs. But on the experience side, I have worked at a space company where I was the only full-time woman. And, when things like an OSHA standard comes in and says, oh, you need 2 different bathrooms, like, what does that mean for a scrappy startup who is literally working on the machine floor, and suddenly, you feel like you are causing everyone else inconvenience, and it is unintentional on the company's end, but it's the reality of you feel like a cost center and an inconvenience, and it's a constant reminder that this environment was not created for you at all. It was created without you in mind, and you are the other. And so I think for me, that's been super formative. And so what I try to do now is really lean in pretty hard on that side of the issue. I think we have a pipeline problem in space. I also think we have an experience problem in a lot of the industry, and making sure that when we are thinking of these spaces, we're thinking inclusive, because it's just it's a negative experience. I was going to use a stronger word, but it's a bad feeling to feel like that when you are trying to follow your dream and your passion. But I will say we're making incredible strides. I've been really fortunate, and so far so good with the baby work thing. I'm still figuring it out, but all signs point to good so far.
Yeah, so you mentioned that we're making some strides in this. What are organizations that you see that are doing a good job of, correcting that imbalance that has been, so ingrained in the space industry for so long?
Yeah, I think one area is conferences. In this past year, one conference I was at in the defense sector, in national security, for example, they very quietly made it an all-female. This was the Truman National Security Project. I'm on the Defense Council there. They quietly made it an all-female speakers, all-female moderators. They didn't make a big deal out of it. It just was. And then I was astonished. So I was just going on their website, and I looked, and they had a very small but strong statement that said, this is not a conference about women in national security. This is a conference that should be evidence that a full suite of subjects in national security can be covered by the expertise solely of women in this field. And I was just blown away by that. Plus, the conference also had childcare and private areas to pump. So that was just like, I was like, okay, I know. So my immediate reaction was to pivot and say, okay, space industry, like, time to step up. There's work to be done. But I will say that commercial companies, generally, I have found when these subjects are brought up to them, they lean in and partner to try to change it. A lot of times they are just unaware. And I think there's not necessarily bad intent in a lot of these situations. It's just they've never thought about that. It's an engineering-heavy industry, so it's not necessarily their first inclination to think about the broader experience, environment, and that inclusivity angle.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is, of course, never a question that we really ask of men, which makes it difficult for me to ask it now. But I am curious, as two mothers who have been working in this industry for a relatively long amount of time, I mean, how do you balance sort of your home life and your work life? And I would imagine that your experiences are quite different just based on the range of time that you guys have been in the field.
Yeah, as I was saying, it was, I traveled a fair bit when my son was born, and of course when my daughter was born, it was sort of full on there, 7 years apart. So I'll tell on the work side what was interesting is that conferences that I went to really didn't have childcare. This is a standard thing. So this is, again, one of those generational things. It's just wonderful to see. You go to a conference and you're seeing all these toddlers, young people, and there is actual real daycare. If I took my child there, I would be with the child, or I would have to find a friend who would at least caretake the child while I'm giving a talk. So that's kind of a very big change. But ultimately, I would say, the work-life balance is not even a generational thing in that sense. There are some changes, but it's your partner. If you do not have a partner who is willing to kind of take spousal responsibility to take care, equal care of the child, then it becomes an impossibility. In fact, I think it's Hillary Clinton who said, right, that it takes a village to raise a child. And it really is that kind of an effort. So even two people are not quite adequate. So primary thing is that your spouse has to be that person who supports you fully. And then you have to have enough environment, societal infrastructure around you that kind of supports you. And if you're a working mother, you never rest. It's like a car either being in forward gear or reverse gear. For the ones that actually know how to drive a stick shift, and you're never in neutral. So you take your role, either in family, fully absorbed, or at work. But so there's a toll, I think, ultimately. But when we are young, we don't even recognize that. It just go 100% of the time. And I can't say that I would do things any differently than I have done.
Yeah, so much of that resonates with me. I so wholly believe that the most important career decision I ever made was my choice of husband. And having that supportive partner has just meant everything as we navigate parenthood, as we navigate travel, you know, and it's still hard. Even having all of the support in the world, when we are away and he'll be on work trips and he's posting photos for client meetings here, there, no one is commenting on those photos asking, where's Delta? You know, but you know, when I am traveling, that is all I get is a litany of like very rude, frankly, questions about, you know, what's happening to the baby while I'm gallivanting on work retreats. So it's like, yeah, it makes me very upset. But at the same time, I've like leaned into it. And for me, right now, coming back from maternity leave, that means that I happen to have a great support structure with my mom. And although I have received some judgment for this, this summer, my daughter is spending almost the entire summer with my parents in Vermont. Every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I'm there. I'm spending with her. I'm working from home there. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I am on the road, I'm traveling, I'm working, I'm sleeping at night because it's what I need to do, and it's a choice that I make. I grant that. I don't believe that there is such thing as perfect work-life balance. I just don't believe it. But I do think work-life integration is something that everyone will decide for themselves, like what fulfills you. And right now, I love this balance. When I'm with my daughter, I'm with her. We're playing, we're engaging. I miss her, of course, those 4 days this summer that I'm not with her during the week, but I'm also doing what I love and what I believe contributes to a better future for her. So it's a give and take. Thank you, that's sweet.
So on a totally different note, how did you guys get interested in space? Have you always been a space nerd? When did it start?
I grew up in Florida, pretty close to the epicenter of space flight. So for me, growing up, seeing people leave the Earth, going to work in space was like very formative, and I think it was always a question of just not if I would get to space, but when. That was like always a career path that I considered to be open to me. So I feel grateful to have, been kind of born and spent my really impressionable years at that point in human spaceflight. And since then, it's just been this, I'm very mission driven in this like specific area. I just want to be in space. I want to work in space. I want to expand humanity's footprint in space. It's, that's the closest thing I have to religion. To me, it's like all these unanswered questions. It's like, that's right at the crux of it. So I think it's become such a part of my identity to the point that I'm naming my daughter after it, that it's just, it's always been what I knew I wanted to do.
Well, for me, it started quite early in not space flight. There was no space flight when I was age 5 or 6. I was born in Calcutta, India, and it was simply the fascination of looking at the night sky. The light pollution still wasn't that bad, and you could actually see stars and planets. And it's just simple curiosity that we all have from being a child to being an adult. And that curiosity kind of continued with me. I used to bug my father, asking him really deep metaphysical questions. Where did we come from? These are big questions for NASA, right? But a child can ask the same thing. And really, there are no real answers. And my father, instead of kind of, shutting me down, kept answering and then made me understand the logic of these circular questions. He made me actually draw a circle one time and said, can you tell me where's the beginning or end of the circle? And even as a child, of course, I couldn't. I drew the circle, whatever shape it was. And that kind of gave me an idea. And it stopped me for a while, but not forever. And so that just continued pretty much through all my life. And I finished my master's in India, studying astrophysics and cosmology. Metaphysics was a very big part of my becoming an astrophysicist and a space scientist ultimately, and how I found my way into the NASA world. I never imagined. People ask me all the time, did you always know you were going to work for NASA? And I did not. NASA was sort of something that happened, but astrophysics, cosmology always was that deep quest. And I just came into actually doing research on the sun. I was in Boulder for a long time, and then started working in DC at Goddard Space Flight Center, doing actual research, creating instruments, flying them on space shuttle, wanting to be an astronaut at that point, even made an attempt. And then I've been at NASA headquarters as a scientist bureaucrat, managing this amazing program, brand new, creating a new discipline out of it called heliophysics. And in a way, like Kellie, I think my goal for a long time has been to sort of make us human beings from being an ocean-faring civilization to a space-faring civilization. And in order to kind of go from the realm of ocean or even the near-Earth space where we have airplanes into deep space, I think you have to know that environment, how the sun actually interacts with this interplanetary medium, with our magnetosphere and ionosphere, with every other planet. And that whole field is actually heliophysics. And I'm still trying to shape the science of heliophysics, the forecasting of space weather, because if we are sending astronauts in deep space, then we have to protect the astronauts from harmful radiation, and we have to protect the spacecraft from single event upsets and all sorts of stuff. And so I feel that the science we have created, we cannot leave home, go into deep space without it. So this is yet another way of kind of supporting the future of human exploration of space, which seems inevitable.
Yeah, so you both speak so passionately about your respective fields and your research. I'm just sort of curious how you hold on to that passion, even in the midst of kind of levels of bureaucracy and trying to like work your way in day after day. Even your dream job can become kind of a chore. So I'm wondering like what you tell yourself, what you hold on to when you need that.
To be perfectly honest with myself, I think probably a lot of my passion comes out of spite from the bureaucracy. I in college, even looking at the shuttle program as it was then, I was like very rational about my chances. I am not a former test pilot. I don't have a military background. I'm not a white dude. Like, these are all things that seem to make up this like very specific profile of the right stuff when we think about, the fortitude that it takes to go into space and explore the next frontier. And that's not me. However, looking at the fact that we have never sent a woman beyond, we've sent 24 men around the moon. We've landed 12 of them on the moon. Like, women are just not part of that equation. But this next giant leap will be for everyone. And for me, the passion for the commercial spaceflight industry is where I saw my chance to fit in and see myself represented and reflected. And so that drives a lot of, my stubbornness in a sense, but also my hope that we will change that demographic, because the profiles need to change too. We have never sent someone beyond low Earth orbit. We don't know what it'll do to a person to be that far away from the rest of your species. The psychology of that was completely unknown. So it makes sense that we should start to look to different profiles than the past. You might need a different set of skills and a different sort of emotional fortitude. And now suddenly we're looking at a much more diverse range of skills: soft skills, strong skills, technical skills, non-technical skills. And that was so appealing to me when I was starting my career, and it still motivates me. That's sort of the change I want to be a part of.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in my case, I would say that I am really still kind of trying to create the understanding and the predictive capability. I would call it space meteorology. We have terrestrial meteorology, which is weather and climate, do that, we have to understand the science.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kellie, I'm curious, where do you see us in 10 years and then eventually in 20 years? Are we on Mars? Are we on the moon? Are we on both? Or maybe just still on Earth?
Yeah, so everything in space industry timeline, you need to add like X number of years to any estimate. It's so rarely accurate, but that audacity is what has driven so much momentum and progress. And so I have to cling on to that. And I do believe, like, what is stopping us right now from going to Mars is it's an economic problem right now. It's the willpower, it's the financing. Like, the technology will be such, and we can get there in 10 years if we as a nation decided like this was important. You know, I think there are a lot of competing things for political priorities that make it tough. You know, when we had our Apollo moment, we were under the threat of mutually assured destruction. We were fighting against a hostile nation state, and we were racing them. So there's no better motivation to like do something and scrounge up the resources and the money to get it done than when you are under threat. Right now, it's hard to close the business case on exploration, but it's extremely important. So to me, it's very encouraging that we have a commercial industry that is partnering with NASA to help pave that way, and who is closing some of the business case on their own side and saving a lot of taxpayer money to be able to expedite our journey to Mars. So do I think we'll be on Mars in 10 years? I hope so. I really do. I brought my daughter when she was 2 months old with me to the Falcon Heavy launch with little ear protection. Just have to say that. But watching the sound barrier break over her head, I was just thinking, oh my God, like, this is her generation. This is the Mars generation. This is going to be normalized for her. Her and her girlfriends in high school will be going to launches, and then post-high school, she may be getting on a spacecraft and journeying to low Earth orbit or beyond, if that's what she chooses. So I think we have the ability to go there. We need to continue the momentum, the support, the willpower, and then I think we're on our way.
Yeah. And then Lika, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the Parker Solar Probe and what you are so excited about with this mission that's, you know, going to touch the atmosphere of the sun.
Yeah, actually, Solar Probe is a very interesting mission in that it's actually going to answer some of the most important, and these are not just physics and astrophysics questions, top 10, that we do not understand very well. So to give you an example, if you are in front of a stove, gas burner, whatever, and you stand in front of it and then you kind of retreat from it, you're going to feel less heat. Temperature is going to drop as you move away from the source of heat. That's common, understanding and basic law of thermodynamics. In the sun, in the outer atmosphere, the part that you could see actually with naked eyes during the total solar eclipse, it is the exact opposite. As you move away from the sun, the temperature increases. It's in fact the surface of the sun that we look at is several thousand degrees Celsius, whereas if you move into the corona, it's millions of degrees hotter. So what makes the corona so hot? And it's not only hot, it is also continuously losing mass in the form of electrons and protons, which are accelerated. This is called solar wind. And this is what creates that environment called space weather. So this is an electromagnetically charged environment that interacts with anything that's electrical in nature, whether it is on our planet or on any other planet. For example, on Mars, we are finding out from MAVEN mission that when there is a strong solar storm, Mars loses its atmosphere much faster because Mars doesn't have a magnetosphere like ours. So we are kind of lucky to have what we have to create sort of the life that we have here. So Solar Probe is actually going to address some of the physics questions of why the corona is so hot. How is the solar wind accelerated? And why is that important? Because with that knowledge, then again, we can create better forecasting tools. So if you want to explore space, or if you want to send instruments, on different planets, we can actually issue warning that this is what you are going to experience. And you can't do forecasting without actually understanding what's going on. And beyond that, we have touched every part of the solar system, right? We have gone to every planet, including Pluto, which is no longer a planet, and the Voyager spacecraft that are actually in the interstellar medium, not even in the solar system. It's outside of our solar system. Yet we haven't visited a star. And that is the most fundamental thing in universe. That is the source of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that it's time for some audience Q&A, and I believe we have those questions picked out.
Yes, we do have a few questions from Twitter. This one says, with so few women in your industries, is it hard to find other women to lean on?
Yeah, I would say yes and no. I think there are a couple of women that are like the go-to archetypes for like what success looks like. They are also so high up that they are inaccessible to most women in the industry in terms of like practical mentorship. So while I would consider them role models and in a very like aspirational way of like what good looks like, I would say that more tactically, it was difficult for me to find women, moms, like people who are at my level, lower down, who were like doing the grind, making it work, trying to get up to that level. But I have had mentors that were both men and women, and I think that my male mentorships have been just super impactful too, because these are folks who are taking a chance on you. They have opened doors for me. They have, our industry is male dominated, so there's going to be more of them. And if you can find the right path that you want to be on, it's like critical to have access in that space. And I've been lucky enough to have that, but I will say that it's something I consciously try to pass forward, because it's still difficult for me to find like young moms that are working in these fields or that are participating in the same areas that I'm participating in. And, that's just kind of lonely when you have something like pediatrician appointments. You have like this life that suddenly changes so dramatically, and there are all these things that you worry about all the time that are so foreign to what your colleagues' existence is like, and that can be a little alienating. So I think being able to talk openly about it, talk openly without judgment about how I'm handling it, and sometimes the answer to that is I'm not handling it, and that's okay too. So I think the more that we get that out there, it's helpful.
I would say, it is not significantly different. It's a question I really never asked. Leaning on people, kind of being self-sufficient, and there are always good colleagues that you can lean on, fortunately. But of course, there are other kinds. There is very clearly cognitive bias in the system. It's not intentional, as we have discussed it before. And I think in today's generation, in the Me Too generation, this is coming up more and more, where people are actually paying attention. And now I'm talking about men, that, even without knowing, they might recognize that there is a cognitive bias in the system. Even when we are doing review panels, for example, we are asking the question, are we selecting enough, women researchers compared to men? And so we are actually training the reviewers these days. So I think there is an awareness in the system where we are addressing these issues. Is it there yet? Of course not. But we make do with what we have.
Thank you so much. This is an interesting one. How much is the present political situation affecting your work?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me first talk about how much it's affecting my personal life, and it's a lot. So it's both. For me, it's like very difficult to separate my personal sphere and my work sphere, because what I'm motivated by is, to make the world a better place for myself, for all of us, for our children, for our children's children. So when there are national crises, it's like difficult for me to compartmentalize, I would say. On the other hand, this is a really interesting time insofar as a lot is happening in commercial spaceflight. There was a lot that was stalling us in previous administrations, both Democrat and Republican, and now there is a surge of progress. And I will say that I actually really like Jim Bridenstine as the head of NASA. He has come a long way in his evolution of thinking, and I give so much credit for that. And I think that he is someone who really wants to move us forward and help us progress. So for me, it's like a very interesting dynamic to work in this environment and to know that there still are people who are committed to doing what they believe is best and committing to partnering with us in a way that leverages everyone's expertise and moves us forward as a species. Like, are there bad days? 100% that are just like very difficult. And I think me as a new mom too, I always index more on like the empathy side of everything. So it's, yeah, I would say like, it's really, yeah, I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, NASA essentially works for the executive branch, so we follow the presidential dictum. I think on the professional side, I would say that NASA has been actually pretty fortunate as an agency in terms of actually getting more budget than we requested. And that's pretty positive. In fact, even on the climate side, we thought we were losing some of our Earth science missions, and those have changed. So I would say, from a NASA perspective, the administration has given us more than we had originally asked, and I want to remain hopeful.
Yeah, and the last thing to say on that is like space is just this, to make a bad pun, like this universally loved thing and sector. And so it's so nice to be like nestled in that part where both sides of the aisle can see like the importance of it, the excitement of it, and there's really not a lot of conflict on agreement on like, is this an important area? Like, everyone generally agrees that, like, yes, everyone loves this, this is exciting, this is important, this is necessary. And so in that sense, it's actually like quite nice. It's very difficult to do science over multiple political administrations, Democrat and Republican alike. If Congress is setting the budget and congressional priorities change every 4 or 8 years, that can be devastating to science and to programs who are guided by these budgets. And so it is nice to have partnership with both industry and government, and we can leverage the best of both. Government has the benefit to think super long term, something that companies that rely on investment can't. They need to come up with what is the quick return on investment, and that enables them to stay in business. So I think we're able in this industry to leverage a really awesome partnership of both of those priorities.
Yeah, I will also just say quickly, as someone who is in a newsroom, it's an interesting needle to thread when you're writing about space and you see all of this other stuff happening around you, like the immigration crisis and just the sort of just situations that continue to unfold with this administration. And you are on a beat that doesn't necessarily touch that, but because of sort of this universally beloved idea behind space, I think there's always some type of audience, at least for counter-programming even, that you need something beautiful and in the midst of all of it, and a space photo can really do that for you. So.
Thank you. Thank you for answering. We are going to break now for a few minutes. Just wanted to thank everyone. Thanks to you all on the panel.
Thanks.